All right, welcome to the show, everyone. Today, our special guest is Ari Meisel. Ari is a best-selling author of the book Less Doing, and he's a kind of a huge productivity guru. I mean, I don't really like the word guru, but he's definitely an absolute expert when it comes to productivity and to systemizing businesses and systemizing lifestyles. I consider someone to be a little bit over the top in some ways. For like, he's very analytical and loves to track like everything. I know, Ari, you've got stuff on your calendar of like what you ate for breakfast and like all these amazing data points and stuff in your life that you keep track of. And I know you've got an amazing story to share about how that's really had a huge impact on your life. Start with that. Let's talk about your background, where you came from, and share with us your story of how you got into productivity.
Sure. So I kind of came at it from I think, an unusual angle, but basically I've been working in real estate development and construction for the last 14 years, and 8 years ago I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and for those who don't know, Crohn's is a chronic inflammatory condition that affects the digestive tract. It's very painful, considered to be incurable, and I was put on a lot of medicine, and I got very, very sick, even sicker. And after one particularly bad night in the hospital, I basically turned things around and decided to go on this long journey of self-tracking and a lot of experimentation, actually, and got off my meds after about 4 months and then went out to compete in my first triathlon. Now, after that, I decided to go for Ironman France, and while I was on the path of training for that, I realized that I was doing good and really good, but I wasn't doing great, and I wasn't really thriving. And I had figured out the nutrition and the supplements and the fitness aspects of what was going on with my body, but there was still this large element of stress. So to deal with the stress aspect, I basically created a new system of productivity called Less Doing, with the goal of helping people to optimize, automate, and outsource everything in their lives, including their health, in order to be more effective. Basically, my approach to everything is trying to free up time so that you can reduce stress and be better at what you are supposed to be good at.
Mhm. That's awesome. And I know you just gave your story real quickly there, but basically healed yourself with Crohn's disease from essentially what you did was just basically tracking numbers on, blood tests and things like that, and just making little tweaks and experiments, and got off all your medications in 4 months. I mean, that's incredible right there. That's not a small achievement by any means.
Thank you. Yeah, it was an interesting experience, to say the least.
Yeah, that's awesome. So talk to us about your systems, your strategies for being more productive, because I know you have a really unique philosophy that's really different than what a lot of people out there are talking about when they talk about time management or being productive.
Yeah, so as I said, my approach is really about stress, not reduction per se, but really stress management, and it comes at it about people don't realize that there's so many stressors in life. Like everything is a stressor in life, and it could be a good stressor in some cases, but generally speaking, if you have chronic stress that you're not necessarily in control of the cause of it, you're going to need some help along the way. There's no question. So with that in mind, basically, I've created this framework, which, as I said, was to optimize, automate, and outsource everything. And it's a really important order to things. Anybody listening to this can outsource something. For $5, you can have people do all sorts of things that you never could have thought possible before. So the problem with that is that if you outsource first and you go right to the outsourcing stage, that doesn't make the task more efficient. In a lot of cases, actually, it'll make it even less efficient. It's like basically like sweeping the dirt under the rug, essentially. So I go through this process of optimizing first, automating second, and outsourcing third. And the optimization is where a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff comes in. That's where you're really looking and taking a hard look at how you're doing the various things in your life and your business, and what the steps are required to actually complete those tasks, because that's where a lot of the problem comes from. Why people feel that they're overwhelmed, why they feel like they're a little bit out of control of what's going on, is that they don't really know what the process requires. One of the things I love to ask people, and what time is it where you are right now?
3:30 p.m.
Okay, so I can ask you this then. So do you remember, without really thinking about it, do you remember what you had for breakfast this morning?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know how many emails you sent last Tuesday?
No idea.
Okay. So that may not be relevant information, but it possibly and probably is. And the truth is that there's 100 things like that that you don't know the answer to that are going on in your life, going on in your life. And that's the thing, is that we have all this information happening to us all the time, all this stuff, all these things we're doing, people we're talking to, inputs and outputs, and people just kind of become blissfully unaware to it. So if you actually stop and take a look at how you're doing things, and there's software to do it for certain applications, there's just writing a journal. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to do this. That's where you immediately can start to optimize things, because you can actually start to identify areas of inefficiency. Once you do that, then the rest of it's kind of mechanics. The automation aspect is in the vein of set it and forget it. So it's, what are these things that I'm doing all the time that I can just automate, set it up, and never have to worry about it again? And that could be filters or software applications, or maybe people. But with the way technology is expanded, you can get so much done without any human intervention now. And then the final step, if there is anything left over, and that means something that could not be optimized away and could not be automated by some other system, that's when you look at outsourcing it to a person, a specialist or a generalist. And what you're giving them is, at that point, pretty much like a bite-sized chunk task that just couldn't be done by a computer. So that's how I approach everything, and that's from business stuff to health as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're totally right about the order. I mean, I know from experience, when I first started trying to outsource stuff for my business, I mean, I would spend more time like emailing people and on Skype calls talking about doing work instead of actually getting the work done. And I was like, you know, basically spending more time talking about doing things instead of actually doing the work. And so when I first started outsourcing, I mean, it was a complete failure. I was basically just throwing away money and spending more time trying to get my team to do what I thought they should be doing, because I didn't focus on that first step, like you talked about, like optimizing. So what are some things that you find really common in people's lives, whether they're authors, entrepreneurs, or just regular average people, that they can use to really optimize their life and save a lot of time?
So one service that I love to recommend all the time, and a lot of people have a problem with their inbox, okay, with email in general. It's just one of those things that kind of gets the better of a lot of people. And I think that while some people might say that email might be something sort of trivial, it's really not. The way that your inbox looks is a really interesting sort of view into your personality and your life in a lot of ways. So I actually put a lot of importance on how people actually deal with their email. So there's a service called followup.cc, and it's essentially an automated email reminder service. That's all it really does, but it's got the power to be used in an incredible way. So basically the way it works, and you know, anybody listening can try this right now. You don't have to even sign up for an account. You can just try it. You send an email from your regular, whatever it is, Yahoo, your iPhone, your computer, it doesn't matter. And you can BCC any time period you want at followup.cc. So maybe, you know, I email you, Tom, and I'm like, oh, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. Like, let's get in touch in a month and see where we're at. And I might write 1 month at followup.cc. Then I can forget about it. Now, a month goes by, and that email comes back to my inbox with a snooze functionality to it, and it serves as a reminder of that conversation that we had, or that I want to follow up on it. So that's amazing, and you can do any time period you want. You know, it could be 1 week at followup.cc, Thursday 10 p.m. at followup.cc, tomorrow at followup, anything you can think of at followup.cc. If you BCC it, you get the reminder. If you CC it, you and the other party both get the reminder. So if you're working with a team, that's actually very helpful. And what's so cool about that is that you start to use it, and a lot of the stress, this is not my opinion, this is a fact, a lot of the stress that comes from email has to do with, did I follow up with that person? Did they get back to me? Did I follow up with them? Like, it's very easy to get kind of lost in the fray. So this completely removes that concern. And the thing is once you start using this a lot, within 5 seconds, if you put a followup.cc on an email and you hit the send button, within 5 seconds of hitting the send button, it's basically completely out of sight, out of mind, which is the way it should be. You shouldn't be wasting brain resources thinking about the emails that you sent. And what it does that's even more powerful, which is really why I love it, is that it actually allows you to get rid of your to-do list entirely. Now, I am completely anti-to-do list, and I'll give you a whole explanation of why. But the biggest problem with to-do lists is that it's a whole bunch of lists. It's a whole bunch of things that you can't do right now. and there's a ton of issues that go along with that. Deep psychological research that's goes back like 80 years about why that's such a bad thing. But basically, this allows you to have a very time-relevant, very specific to-do item. It's not even a list necessarily. Plus, because it has that built-in snooze functionality, it allows you to do what I think is one of the most important things in terms of time management, which is actually learning timing. So you don't have to worry about prioritization. You don't have to worry about to-do lists. The skill that people need to work on is timing. And what I mean by that is that everything you do, everything I do, there is a better and a suboptimal time to do those things. And that's everything from when you do creative work, to when you sleep, to when you work out, to when you eat, to when you take a shower. Like any of those things, there are better and worse times. Now, some of them are kind of easy to figure out, and working out is actually one of them. A lot of people, you try in the morning, see how you feel, try in the evening, try in the afternoon, and you can kind of see how you feel. But creative work is an interesting one. Personally, I can only do creative work after 8 o'clock at night, and it's something I've learned about myself through followup.cc, because I played around with different times, and I would snooze it to the right time. And snoozing it, by the way, is just, that's what they're calling it, but it's really deferring. And deferring is not procrastinating. Procrastinating is when you're actually, you just don't want to do it. It's an emotional thing, whereas deferring is taking an active role in deciding that there's a better time to do this. And when you do things at the most optimal time for you, you are just 100 times more productive than you could possibly be any other time.
That's such a great point, that deferring is not procrastinating. And I've noticed that in my own life. Like, sometimes it feels like, if I'm putting something off, it means I'm procrastinating. It means I'm not being productive, and it's easy to beat yourself up about that. But like you said, when you have a system for actually getting things done, and okay, this task is going to be done, next week, Tuesday at 7 a.m. or whatever, and it's taken care of, you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's like totally off your mind, and
Exactly.
You can be totally present and focused on what you're working on right now, which I think, especially for creative people, for entrepreneurs, for authors, like if you're not present, when you're talking to clients, or when you're writing your book, or when you're working on a big project, it's going to be really hard to get the results you want to get.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so that's awesome. Awesome. So keep going, Ari. I mean, what else can people do to really optimize their life?
So another big concept in my system is what I call creating the external brain, and that's at its heart. That's, I'm really talking about note-taking, but you can obviously take it to a much higher level. And the number one service for that is Evernote. The thing with Evernote, so do you use Evernote?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so a lot of people do use Evernote, and a lot of people don't use it correctly, in my opinion. The way to use Evernote properly is to overuse it, is to not think about what you're putting in there and just put stuff in there. Now, of course, you can use it also to think about things you want to put in there and organize things in to some extent. But for the most part, you really need to just unabashedly, without any judgment, get your thoughts out and into some sort of system that can keep track of them. Because the human brain is really, really great for coming up with ideas, but it's terrible at executing on them and holding on to them. So you need something to sort of stand in for you. And Evernote just makes it so much better. So it's like, what I love about Evernote is that it's really intelligent in the way that things search. So if you are looking for something, for instance, in Evernote, or if you use the plugin for Chrome, Safari, or any of those things, which is the Clipper, you basically can search in Google, or you can clip something, an article, a blog post, a YouTube video, it doesn't matter, and it will pop up and it'll show you relevant notes from your Evernote. And it's just fascinating when this happens, because if you use Evernote properly and you have a lot of content in there, in my case at this point I have about 15,000 notes in there. And most of that is things that I've clipped, or YouTube videos or whatnot. But if I go to Google right now and I search for anything, 3 or 4 things are going to pop up in Evernote, from Evernote. And it's as if I'm pulling something from the depths of my brain that I could never possibly do on a biological level. And there might be something that I clipped 2 years ago, and something from 5 months ago, and something from 2 days ago. And at the time, not all 3 of them just seemed interesting, but they weren't necessarily specifically relevant to anything. And now all of a sudden I'm looking for something, and here all this stuff has just come back to me, and it's just amazing. And it's another one of those things where, like followup.cc, you're using it so that you don't have to be thinking about it, and you know that something's basically like taking care of it for you.
Yeah, that's another awesome point and awesome way to improve your productivity for sure. I was just, at the end, it's the January right now, so kind of the end of the year in 2014, I was kind of going through, reviewing my year, setting goals for the new year. And one of the things I went through is all my old journals, or a couple of my old journals, right? Physical, written, I got physical journals. This was like before Evernote even existed. So this was like my journal from like 5 years ago, and I noticed an idea in there that like is immediately applicable to my business today. And I've already applied that to my business and already seen like huge results from that one idea that I got 5 years ago at a conference, right? And so losing track of those ideas, losing track of that information can be devastating. I mean, like you can be missing out on huge opportunities you don't even know about because you're not keeping track of your information. And I kind of had to learn this the hard way. I mean, I'm a paper and pen kind of guy, so I love to write a paper and pen, but having little scraps of paper all over the place is incredibly inefficient. And it doesn't really help you when you actually need those ideas at the right time. Like you said, there's a right time for everything. And most of the time it's not the right time for those ideas. But when it is, if you can have technology or a system that brings those ideas to you at the right time, that is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. So what about for people who are like not tech savvy? What about people who are maybe a little bit older or don't know followup.cc? Have you worked with clients who struggle with getting stuff digitized and really help them improve that? And if so, how can people who are struggling with that kind of issues really take this information and use it and apply it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I mean, it's a fair point. The concepts that I have come up with and the framework of less doing really has nothing to do with technology, which is really important. And the whole optimize, automate, outsourcing actually could involve no technology at all. But what technology, and the other thing is what technology does is it magnifies whatever's going on in your life. So if you have good things happening, good habits or bad habits, it will magnify those. Email is a really good example of that. It's like if you have 10,000 emails, like getting some sort of system that's going to categorize them for you doesn't really make it better. It just creates more folders for you to then look in to see your 10,000 emails. So technology is an add-on that can make things better or worse. But at the heart of it, you're really talking about a philosophy of how you approach this stuff. And the idea of just sort of regaining self-awareness, again, really doesn't have anything to do with technology. And you can take somebody who is a total technophobe and just tell them, like, write down the food that you ate today, or write down how many times you picked up the phone, or got on the phone, or write down what time you went to sleep last night and how you felt in the morning. Like there's a lot of things you can do with pen and paper, but it just gets people in that sort of habit. But again, even a technophobic person, you can get them to get a Fitbit, and just that kind of information is really powerful. It's just amazing how much awareness that brings. So the idea of optimize, automate, outsource really applies regardless of whether or not you're using technology.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. Yeah, and like these numbers or information really does help us make better decisions. It's like, if you had a buddy, every day called you up and said, hey, Ari, did you work out today? Did you exercise today? Did you eat healthy today? Like that, everyone knows if you had someone like that who did that to you every day, you would get better results in that area because just by the process of having your attention focused on a certain subject will get you to get better results. And it's the same way with measuring things. And having a computer do it for you can be just as effective because it gets you to focus on what you need to do at the right time that you can do it, right?
Right, exactly.
Awesome. So I know you have this really cool program. I mean, I've followed your blog, for years now, and you've got a bunch of really cool blog posts on there about how to actually apply your concepts from Less Doing, and that's at lessdoing.com. And one of your blog posts, or a couple of them, you actually talk about this program called Zapier.
Yes.
So you can kind of explain that, what it is, and some really cool ways to use that to save tons of time.
So I love Zapier. So there's Zapier and there's IFTTT, which are almost identical services, but they work with different web services. So basically the way it works is it's sort of like an if this then that. So if this happens over here, then do this thing over here. So simple things like if it's going to rain tomorrow, then send me a text. That's a really basic one. Another one might be if I post something on Twitter with a specific hashtag, then add that to a line in a Google Docs spreadsheet. That might be another one. But you can really get very, very complex with it. So they work with services like every kind of web service you can think of, whether it's, let me think, like Pinterest, Dropbox, Google Drive, Harvest for invoicing, PayPal, all those kinds of things. And it'll just automate interactions between them. Now, I've written an article on my blog called A Well-Oiled Machine, and it shows my podcast production process, which has been almost completely automated through Zapier and IFTTT. So everything from putting it in Dropbox to getting it transcribed to getting it posted, edited, all that kind of stuff. You can really it's the kind of things that take you 30 to 60 seconds to do, but you're doing them dozens or hundreds of times a day. This can completely eliminate them for you.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, I mean, for me personally, I mean, like, I love the ideas, I love the concept of, like, Zapier and this and that, and but I don't personally feel like I have a lot of time to every day think about, oh, well, how can I use this tool to save me time? You know what I mean? It's like,
Sure.
I don't have the time to think about how to use it. So so where can people go to find out how to do that stuff? Because I know you've got some really cool resources on that.
Sure. Well, so first of all, I have my podcast, which is it's a Less Doing podcast, and there's also the blog, of course, Less Doing. Everything's a Less Doing. But the podcast is really sort of my love right now and where I focus a lot of my attention. And people can ask questions for the podcast. They can record it, and then we'll play it, and I'll answer it. And we've got some really good questions about automation there. But I'm always explaining and providing practical examples of how I use these various services. The other thing is that in May, I have a big event coming up, which should be my first sort of 3-day live conference event in New York City. And it is the Less Doing Live event. So it's lessdoinglive.com. And there's going to be some really big speakers. Dave Asprey is going to be speaking, Ben Greenfield, Joe Polish, Dean Jackson, and then we're going to have a whole bunch of workshops, and IFTTT and Zapier are going to be a big workshop that we're going to be doing. So people actually get to do some real practical work and see how they can apply this to their own lives. So that's coming up in May, and if people go to lessdoinglive.com and they sign up for a free 1-hour coaching call, they can probably find out how they can use it right away, but then they'll be able to also hear about the event and see if they're sort of a good fit for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think the key thing with this optimization and systemization stuff for a business is like it's really personalized. Like on your blog you've got your system for a podcast show, so pretty much anyone with a podcast show can kind of take your system and model it and make a few tweaks and have that done. But for most businesses, like this is a really, just like every person is unique, we have a unique lifestyle, a unique way of living. Like every business, is kind of unique in some ways. So, share with us like some stories. I know you work with like big guys that you just mentioned, like Dean Jackson and Joe Polish, and help them systemize and optimize their businesses. So, I mean, what do these like ultra successful people who already have big businesses, like what are they using optimization for to actually save them time and get more done?
So there's two things. First of all, when I'm working with really big people like that, what I'll usually end up doing is actually working with their team instead, because they're not going to necessarily implement the things that I would normally teach. So I work with their team and try to make the team as optimal as possible. The problem that I find with a lot of people like that, a lot of people who are very successful and have created really big companies and have all these different ideas and entrepreneurs, and I've worked with a lot of people like that, is that they have an issue with communicating with their team. So you'll have these people who have these great ideas, and they tell the team like, oh, do this, do this, do this. Okay, yeah, great. And then 20 minutes later, they've got 4 different really great ideas that they kind of throw at them, and it just overloads them. And then they're frustrated because those ideas aren't getting acted upon, and it's sort of a whole vortex that happens. So really what I focus on in those situations is helping their team and their operations get as efficient as possible, and then working with them to properly communicate with that team. Because one of the things that's sort of surprising for people is that just because you've become very successful doesn't mean that you're good at delegating. And delegating is really about communicating effectively what you need done, and also sort of communicating the vision that you have in your head. So that's what I end up usually working on with those people.
That's awesome. So can you share with us, in just a few minutes we have left, some awesome tips for communication and for delegating because it is a huge issue for not just big, successful entrepreneurs, but even just someone who's a solo entrepreneur starting out who wants to hire their first web designer, their first contractor.
Sure.
How can you get way more out of that process without spending a lot of time?
So the general recommendation I make to everybody is that I firmly believe that everybody at some point should work with a virtual assistant, and specifically an on-demand virtual assistant service. So something like Fancy Hands, for instance, which I think starts at $50 a month or something. And the reason that you want to do that is an on-demand service means that you're never dealing with the same assistant. There's basically a pool of thousands of assistants, and you put your task out there, and any one of them can pick it up. Now, if you are having to communicate with someone who you don't know, they don't know you or how you like things done, it may be the only time you ever work with that person. That's a really interesting parameter to put on you in terms of how you effectively communicate your needs. And it forces you to be better at communicating. And if you're explaining something via email, you find that people get much more efficient in their language. They're less flowery. They're less vague. They're more specific about what they actually need done. And it has this trickle-down effect to every other kind of outsourcing. So, for instance, I outsourced the writing of a book recently to a ghostwriter, and I've seen proposals or job descriptions for that kind of thing written that were pages long, and my first one probably was as well. This last one was 4 lines, and it was done perfectly. So it's really about exactly describing what you need done, and a big part of that is understanding the process yourself.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, how would you go about that? Because, like you can spend hours thinking about what I should write in my job description or what I should write to tell my assistant what to do. But like how do you actually formulate these systems that you have? Because, I mean, like basically your whole philosophy is you take a process, you take a problem, you figure out how to solve it, and then you systemize it in a way that either the processes or in this case, your team can do that for you. So like how would you approach a new task, a new problem you have, and how do you actually systemize that?
It's that optimize, automate, outsource process. So the first step on optimizing is really identifying what the process is. So you try to look at the steps. And one example would be like paying a bill. Okay, so it's very easy to be like, oh, pay this bill. But if you actually look at the steps required, what bank website do you go to? What section of that site do you go to? What account does it come out of? When do you want to pay? Like, there's so many elements that go into it. The average number of steps required to pay a bill is 27. Okay, which sounds absurd, but it's true. So that's the thing, is that you look at the actual process. And the thing is that there may be elements in there that you need to do yourself, and there may be elements that can be done by somebody else, but it's not until you actually break it down into actual digestible chunks that you really get to see that kind of information.
Yeah, that's such a great point. So basically what you're talking about is just break it down. Step 1, step 2, step 3.
Yeah, exactly. Very granular level.
Go ahead.
I said on a very granular level.
Right, so exactly. So you're getting as detailed as possible, and I think that's one of the big mistakes a lot of people make when they're first outsourcing is you don't have enough detail. So the person's like, oh well, you think they can read your mind or something because you're not giving them enough information to really do a good job, and then you're always disappointed because your team is failing you, but it's really you're the leader. You need to take charge and tell them exactly what to do.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Ari. You shared some awesome info with us today. I really appreciate it. Before you go, tell us where people can find out more info about you and also this awesome Less Doing Live seminar you're doing.
Yeah, well, thanks, Tom. So everything's at lessdoing.com, and again, for the Less Doing Live event, it's lessdoinglive.com. And if you go there, you can sign up for a free 1-hour coaching call and hear more about the event.
Awesome. Thanks, Ari.
Thank you.